So the first thing after we leave a movie is I have a very tiny, it's a joke between me and Brett. Is the longer the movie, the more likely is I'm the guy that has to go to the bathroom in the middle of it.
You got a real big beard and a little bitty bladder.
Tiny bladder. And so after that, we hop in the van, and usually one of us is like, okay, what'd you think? And we can kind of gauge. We don't give a concrete review score, so it's not like, oh, we walk out of the movie, this is a 10 or this is a 7. But we can gauge kind of if somebody enjoyed the movie or they had some misgivings about the movie pretty quickly, I think, based off of just kind of how we begin to talk about it, or if instantly we're talking about things we really loved, or instantly we bring up something that we didn't like, then we can kind of tell, oh, he didn't like this nearly as much as I did. And so going into this episode, I knew that I enjoyed it. And the majority of people, it seems, that have watched this film seem to really enjoy it.
The greatest action movie of all time. 10 of 10.
So I really kind of wanted to frame this discussion a little bit differently today and really kind of dive deeper into the misgivings that Brett had with the movie, potentially. So you seem to have had several misgivings with the movie, and I really wanted to dive into kind of what your thoughts were going into different themes and scenes, and see if it kind of aligns or changes any of my opinions, which I know it won't, because my opinions are all the correct ones. But I wanted to see if maybe we could show you just how wrong you were on certain things.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
In today's culture, we are constantly inundated with the negative, and we're forced to talk about the things that we hate. So let's flip the script, and let's talk about the things that we love. We love TV and film, so join two dudes as we break down our favorite movies and how they relate to life. Welcome to the Minivan Movie Club.
Let's go!
All right, riders, welcome back to the Minivan Movie Club podcast. It's me, Nick, the bearded boy wonder. I'm sitting across from Brett, the mustachioed maestro himself.
Yay!
How you doing today, Brett?
I'm great. I have a nickname.
You got a nickname. We're switching it up a little bit on today's episode. I'm going to be kind of leading the discussion.
He's sitting in the driver's seat. I'm riding shoddy.
I've never driven a minivan before, so we're going to see how this goes. So
be careful. You know what they say.
Once you go minivan, you never go back.
Never. Once you go minivan, you don't do anything again.
Yeah.
It's just stuck.
Minivan for life. To start out, we're going to jump into, I asked Brett to bring a streaming recommendation for this week. I personally watched Puss in Boots, The Final Wish. I loved it. I highly recommend it. It is streaming on Peacock right now, so you can watch it with your kids. You could watch it by yourself first if you kind of want to run it by and make sure, but there's nothing that you should really be too worried about a kid watching. I watched it with my 3-year-old. He absolutely loved it. Got a lot of heart in that movie. It's very funny and some really sweet action scenes. I highly recommend Puss in Boots to anybody that's just looking for a fun family movie night, or just something you don't have to get too emotionally invested in. It's a very easy watch.
The movie I want to talk about today that I recommend you go out and watch on Netflix, if you're just looking for something to stream really quick, and this also speaks a little bit to the theme of our episode today, but I would go check out The Gentleman on Netflix. Nick and I actually watched this movie in theaters together. It is a very stylized fighting action movie, but it's directed by Guy Ritchie, so it's got this own kind of flair. It's got a little bit of non-conventional storytelling, but a really good cast, really good acting. It's got one of my favorite actors of all time, Mr. Director of Culture at the University of Texas, Matthew McConaughey. All right.
Everybody loves Matthew.
And this movie is all right. It's fun, but it's got a really good story, really good moments, a lot of laugh out loud moments, and then just some good old-fashioned action comedy fun. Check it out on Netflix and let me know what you think about it.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with any of Guy's previous films, you'll definitely enjoy this one. He did Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey Jr. He did Snatch with Brad Pitt. So he's got that style. It's a slick action movie. You do have to be able to.
So if you like action movies, you like gun movies, you like movies where you're going to be on a little bit of a goose chase trying to solve a little bit of a mystery, it's a good movie. Seriously, check it out. You'll like it.
I did not realize until just now, looking at his Google page, that he directed the Aladdin movie in 2019.
Yeah, that one wasn't as good.
I don't recommend that one necessarily. Unless
Just
you
go,
just
if
really
you want to
like
watch that movie, just go watch the real one.
All right, this week, me and Brett watched John Wick Chapter 4. We're going to hop into the backseat breakdown. We've got some discussion here. And before we do anything, I've talked to a few of our listeners, and I know that some of them, they start out a few of the episodes of our show. They may not have necessarily seen the movie that they're going to watch. So before we hop into the spoiler-filled information that we're going to discuss today, I want to ask Brett, if somebody wants to go see, do you recommend this movie to them? Hey, I want to go catch a movie. Should I go see John Wick Chapter 4? I like action movies. I like the first John Wick.
If you like action movies, go see this movie. There is a really good breakdown from Screen Crush to break down episodes or part 1 through 3. It's 15 minutes. If you watch that, I think you'll really enjoy this movie a lot more. But even myself, I've seen 1 through 3 when they originally came out. I didn't watch that recap video. You did.
I watched it. Highly recommend.
I didn't, and I still was able to watch this movie and understand what's going on. But to understand John Wick as a film vehicle, I think it helps to have that connective tissue to understand some of the motivations. But if you're just looking for some car crashes, some beat 'em ups, this is an easy movie, and it's got plenty for you. So yeah, I would say if you're wanting to watch an action movie, this is a good movie to watch.
Yep, I also recommend it, but right now we're going to hop into the more spoiler-filled information of our show. So if you haven't seen it and you have any desire to see it, I highly recommend you go watch it, and then you come back and listen to the rest of the episode. All right, so John Wick Chapter 4 follows the titular character on his journey to gain back his independence from the high table. John's approach to accomplishing his goal is the approach that only John Wick has, which is to kill as many people as possible to achieve his goal. We're introduced to John Wick where Chapter 3 leaves off. So he's with the Bowery King, played by his longtime acting companion, Lawrence Fishburne. And we get to see John start his journey from there. We're introduced to a new antagonist in this story played by Bill Skarsgård, named the Marquis. Bill is obviously known for his role as Pennywise in the remake of It. And the remake
Shout
of
out
Chapter
to
2.
another little streaming suggestion. Go watch Barbarian on HBO Max. Bill Skarsgård is in it, and he's an evil villain. Go watch it.
Yes, watch it. You will.
Don't listen to anything else about it. Don't look at it. Don't read anything about it. Just go watch it. Barbarian on HBO Max. Continue.
The Marquis also has a goal, and his goal is to send as many people at John Wick as it takes to kill him. So these two are a perfect match for each other, almost like Batman and the Joker. They need each other to accomplish their goal, which is for us to see as many people die as possible in the time frame of this movie. So Brett, hopping into it, I've got a question for you, and this is a little bit different format than we've done in the past. I'm going to be asking Brett some questions because I really want to get his feedback on some things I thought about the movie. So Brett, after the movie, what themes do you think the director was going for?
Good question. So I think there's a couple of themes here that I want to caveat all of this by saying it's a John Wick movie. This is an action movie. You go watch it to watch fights and explosions, car chases, basically anything that's very stereotypical of an action movie. You go watch it here to be done better than anybody else. So all the things you love about Fast and the Furious, John Wick does them better, and they're real. John Wick does it all better. It's just the way it is. So all the themes and stuff that I'm going to pick up on are really like background things I'm just taking away. Don't go to this movie expecting to watch like an Oscar-nominated film that's very intense, of like emotional weight. It's just stuff to go watch and have fun. It's a popcorn movie, but it's done extremely well. So I think a couple of themes I picked up immediately was like the meaning of like real friends, because like early on in the movie there's the line, "Friendship means very little when it's convenient."
Yeah, that was one of my favorite lines from the movie, probably from the whole series, but it's a line that kind of transcends everything.
Mm-hmm.
We all say that we're friends, but as soon as somebody asks you to help them move, you find out if they're your real friends.
Mm-hmm. And there's this line where they say, "Fools talk, wise men listen." And it kind of gave me this sense that one of the weird things that I think John Wick 4 or that John Wick as a series as a whole really speaks to is there is honor amongst thieves. They have this underworld, this culture. There are rules that we have to live by. And every once in a while, one of those rules gets broken. And so all the thieves decide, well, you've broken the rules. It's over. So I think that there's some really interesting stuff there to talk about, friendship, honor amongst thieves. But those are just kind of a couple of the initial ones.
So in an interview that Keanu did with Jimmy Fallon, he was asked about the film. And so his response was, it's a movie about friendship, brotherhood, father-daughter relationships, the choices that you make, the rules, the consequences, and who you are as a man. Do you think that the film did a good job of establishing these themes from the beginning? Not necessarily how they fulfilled those themes at the end, but just do you think it establishes that just kind of watching it?
So in post, reflecting about that, yeah, I think it satisfies those requirements. But again, if someone was to ask me, hey, what was this movie about? I don't think I would say that. But I know Keanu, especially on talk shows, is really good with great sound bites. Like, I love his sound bite when they're like, what happens when you die? And he says, well, I know when you're gone, the people that are still here will miss you very much. And it's like, oh.
Yeah, he had one on the Fallon interview. He brings up Keanu Reeves' comic book that he wrote, Berserker, and he asks him, he goes, Keanu, how'd you come up with the idea for this comic book? He's like, well, how does anybody come up with the idea for anything? You sit in a room for a long time and you write it down. But it's just so very funny because he's like, it's not like he's like, oh, it came from, this childhood relationship that I had. He's just like, how does anybody make anything up, Jimmy? Like,
yeah,
come on.
So I think it's a good movie. Again, but it's just an action movie. Like, this is a great example. Last week we talked a lot about Top Gun Maverick and it being this awesome, like perfectly created action movie that is family friendly, but it's also deeply personal. This one obviously is not family friendly. It's rated R.
No,
it's a very violent movie, but there's something to be said about going directly towards your base, knowing your target demographic and just giving them exactly what they want. I think over the series of the John Wick movies, he kills like 388 people, something like that. That's a lot of people.
Rookie numbers.
Yeah, that's a lot of people in general, but this is the post-retirement of John Wick. So to me, this is just an action movie. It's just balls to the wall. It almost reminds me of a video game, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit, but this movie just feels like if a video game was real and it's done really well, it's an original story. So it's basically you watching John Wick kill everybody in between some cutscenes.
So I do think that from a setup perspective of the themes, I think from the beginning you do get to see some of that dynamic of being friends with somebody is hard. It can be, especially if you're a real friend and you're there through the hard times, because they establish instantly pretty much anybody that's had a connection with John is going to be punished or killed.
And that's also a theme like throughout the whole series is people, that honor amongst thieves, people are willing to help John because they know of his personal circumstances. Spoiler warning, the whole reason that we're connected to this guy in the very first movie, spoiler warning, is his wife dies of some mysterious disease. And then 2 days after she's dead, the dog that he was given from her gets killed. So we were like, oh, this is bad. Side note, probably the most important theme from any John Wick movie is that dogs are more important than people.
That's true.
Dogs are always the emotional character in this movie. Like anytime there's an emotional payoff, it always has something to do with a puppy or a dog. And it just reminds you dogs are better than people.
That is true. But it also, I think if you're going to take just a whole series theme, I think it's going to show you that revenge is a messy deal. He goes on a revenge story for his dog, and then he's now killed 300-something people to try to resolve the issues that created in his life. And so revenge honestly, is a messy price to pay. That's
a good point. Honestly, that's probably if you were going to take something very like philosophically from the entire series, that would definitely be it. Revenge is messy. It is incredibly taxing, and it'll create problems far more complicated than what you originally sought to solve, because originally we're trying to avenge the death of Daisy, the puppy, and very quickly that spirals out of control, and we're 4 movies into this trying to just deal with it. And that's kind of a theme they talk a lot about in the movie of what are you going to do? What's the end? What's the end game? And I don't think he's ever gotten to that. I think he's just like just the next thing. I'll just kill the
He's
next
just
thing.
cleaning up the mess,
Just kill
which
it all.
is basically just him making a big mess of bloody gut innards everywhere.
I really think that Donnie Yen is the standout of the movie. I think he out-Johned John Wick in a John Wick movie. So he gives me like a emotional arc that I'm interested in, and their dichotomy there, that relationship, the way it's adversarial, but it's also very friendly. It's very much like, hey, look, there's honor amongst these. I've been hired to kill you, so I'm going to do that, but I'm going to look for ways that I cannot do that. Let me see if there's loopholes in the rules, or let me at least be honorable to you when there's circumstances that I could just
Cut you some slack.
shoot you in the back. Or
And so we talked about how they set it up. After you get out of the film, do you think that they've accomplished any goal? Do you walk away thinking, I know that's not what you go into this movie for, but do you walk away thinking, oh man, like now I'm really thinking about my friendships, or now I'm really thinking about my father-daughter relationship, or now I'm thinking about who am I as a man? Would I compromise my safety to continue to be John's friend because I believe in what he believes in?
see, so I don't know if like the whole movie does, but there is a really cool moment early on in the movie where John Wick is in Japan at the Japanese Continental Hotel, and he's with his buddy, and they realize that they're under attack, and he needs him to protect his daughter.
Yeah, the Japanese hotel manager.
And they're having the fight, and then all of a sudden the evil goons are there, and it's like, oh, there's just this guy, John Wick, and his daughter. They've got to get out of here. And John Wick says to him, take care of your daughter. And he says, I am. And the way I internalized that was the way he was taking care of his daughter was by showing her how to fight. Showing her, like, I'm not going to give up on this. Even though he very easily could have retreated and gone to some, like, safe house. Instead, he ends up dying, battling and protecting what he thinks is right. And I kind of thought of it to my kids of, there are certain things in life that you have to fight for, be willing to fight for, be willing to die for, because you know it's right. And when we talk about the honor amongst these, he could have very easily just thrown out John Wick, not harbored him or given him safe passage. And the daughter in part of the movie is like, why are we doing this? Why are we helping him? Everything he touches gets killed and destroyed. This is all your fault. But he says, I am. And I kind of imagine that. So there's little moments here I think I can take other places. But again, it's a movie. It's a fun movie where things are happening that are a little bit funny and crazy. Some things that are big, but that specific moment I can imagine taking back of, I want to be a good father because of moments like that. And that's what I think movies are really for. If there are little anecdotes you can take away from and really kind of put into your life, that's good.
In their battle, you've got the hotel manager who's decided to support his friend John throughout everything. And he's standing up to defend him, to give him time to escape. And then you've got Kane, who is there trying to capture John because he wants to defend his daughter and keep her safe and out of this world. Mm-hmm. And so there's a moment in their fight where Kane has clearly won the battle, and he tells him to take his daughter and to go somewhere else, to basically, you can fight another day, like go hide, get away, go as far away as you can, recuperate, and then you can come back. And he, instead of taking that chance to go away with his daughter, he decides that he's going to see this battle through to the end.
Knowing he's lost,
knowing he's going
There's
to
no
die.
way to win.
The thing is, though, he has to also know that if he dies at the hand of Kane, his daughter is going to go down a similar path that John's on, which is a path of destruction, where he has the opportunity to continue to be her father. He's showed her the lesson pretty much in that he defended his friend, but now he's carrying that loyalty throughout the end. And so the idea I think about is, when we're younger, we have friends that we would ride or die for, we'd do anything for. And if they were to call you and they had done something that was less than savory, there's a good chance when you're a younger person, especially without kids, that you would compromise your situation, be there in any moment. But now you have a kid. You have to think about, if I get in trouble for this, is it worth my kid not having a dad in their life for the next 5 years, the next 10 years if I get, caught for this situation? And he had an out in that situation. Obviously, they were going to be on the run and all these other things, but he's still there with his daughter, and his daughter still has a father. Now she's on a path of revenge and anger and all those other things because she didn't take that out. I don't know if you caught any of that when you were watching it, but to me, that was just like, here's your chance to be a dad. Like, you have a chance to really do what's best for your daughter in this situation, which is likely for her to continue to have a father, because you've already stood up for a lot of what you believe in. But
see, I like the interpretation. His daughter's clearly an adult. Like, it's not like she's a little kid.
She's not a 12-year-old.
She's not a 13-year-old. I mean, I would assume she's in her 30s. He's well into his adulthood, into his elderly years. So I think there's a little bit to be said about that. And it's more so about the principles of, like, we learn in this John Wick world. In the first movie, we get teased a little bit of the Continental Hotel and how the rules work. In the second movie, part 2, it really expands into the underworkings of this underworld, how all the while this underworld is controlling everything. You think it's a little underworld? No, it's the world. And so I think he's showing her there are certain things that we don't bow to, no matter what. Even in the face of defeat, we hold resolute to our beliefs. And I think that's kind of a really interesting thing. But I also think, just like taking a step, there's kind of this dichotomy of looking for the themes and then looking at what's awesome. This is also like the best sword fight in the whole movie.
Oh, yeah.
There's no background music. It's just their swords hitting each other back and forth. And Kane is awesome. He's clearly the superior opponent here. He's doing everything. He's blind. It's not CGI. It's not two young studs just beating the tar out of each other. Most of this movie is like 90%, done by the actors. So this is the two actors actually choreographing the swords fight, and it looks awesome.
Oh, and you also get an awesome Easter egg, which is Donnie Yen telling his daughter after he kills her father, "I'll be waiting for you," which is a direct nod to Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. After the bride, played by Uma Thurman, kills Vivica A. Fox, she tells her daughter that, because she's like 12 at that time, "I'll be waiting for you," because she knows you're setting her up for a path of revenge. She saw you kill her parent. She's going to train to come and kill you one day.
That's cool.
So the movie is 2 hours and 49 minutes long, listed on Google when you look it up. Did this movie keep you engaged the whole time?
No.
I mean, that's the simple answer, yeah.
So the first movie in the series is an hour and a half, I think. It's
like an hour and 36 minutes.
It's pretty short. And that movie, it is like it lulls you in to, you're like, oh, I know this movie for the first 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden Daisy dies and we're like, what? No, you do not kill the dog. You have broken the rules. And you are with John Wick. I mean, like, kill everybody, burn the world down because Daisy deserves justice. # justice for Daisy. And you're like, it's awesome. The second movie is a little bit longer and it really expands on the universe. The third one, probably my favorite in the series. I don't know. And then this one, there feels like a lot of superfluous fluff. It's still great. The cinematography is great. The music is great. There's a lot of good use of color here. And when I went and did some of my own personal research after watching the movie, I felt like, oh, this is really interesting how they did this, some of the symbolism. But just like as an immediate watch, I told you when we got out of the theater or sit in the van, I felt like they could have cut this or that. And I think they could have got this down to 2 hours and 15 minutes. But in a movie that's based on the suspension of disbelief, where we have 15-minute, 20-minute intervals of just wave after wave after wave of goons that John Wick is just destroying, or that he's struggling with. He's having to fight this group that has all this new technology or these, shields and suits. So he can't just shoot them in the head. He has to knock them to the ground, lift up their mask, and shoot them in the throat. It's a really difficult thing to suspend your belief for 2 hours and 50 minutes. It's a lot, but it's not to say it's a bad movie. It's just, I think that if this movie's 2 hours, I think it's a better film because it's a little more simplified and you're not trying to, what did you think?
I actually enjoyed it all the way through. I didn't really feel any boredom or
loser.
I know it
No,
kept me
sorry.
engaged enough, but I do think there are more situations where it's easier for me to like nitpick it, like you said, just because asking anybody to kind of turn their brain off for that long, you're asking for them to eventually there's going to be things that pop up that you're like, that doesn't really work here for me or make a lot of sense. Visually, I thought it was very pleasing. We've talked in the past about this. If there was an Oscar for stuntmen and stunt work, this film deserves it, 100 times over.
Here's the video of the guy. I think it's on TikTok or YouTube Shorts somewhere. In the movie, there's a guy that gets thrown down an escalator, and he rolls all the way down it, and it looks painful. And one of the things I love about this movie is, as much as we like Top Gun Maverick for the practical effects they did with the jets, here's people laying their bodies on the line, rolling down flights of stairs.
Well, there's the scenes with the cars in Paris. Those guys were really thrown into moving cars, and the stuntmen talked about how to kind of hit the cars correctly. Because there's one of those guys that actually Keanu talked about in an interview was the only one that actually had to go to the hospital, and that's because the way that he hit the car was a little off. And so these guys, I mean, they really put their bodies
sacrificed,
on the line.
and it comes off so much better. I'm not saying that we need more movies of people doing this.
We need more people to be thrown into cars. You heard it here on the Minivan Movie Club podcast.
We need a lot of people to get out there and sacrifice their bodies for us to laugh at.
There's a scene where they're going through a house in France, and you get this top-down angle that you've seen in video games, especially older video games, but we've never really seen it done in this long shot form of a movie, and done so well. You add on the shotgun that's shooting out the dragon's breath with the fire, and it's beautiful to look at. You can tell that there's not a lot of cuts in it, and so it makes it seem like more intense. You're more invested, and then just looking at it from that angle, they do a really good job of. There's 14 fight scenes in this movie, like big fight sequences, and they do a good job of like really trying to change the background on each one to kind of keep you invested in a movie with just so much action going on. Because it could be easy to just be like, oh, here comes more mindless drones just coming at John. He's just snapping necks and cashing checks. But no, instead, they really try to do a good job of setting up the angles of the camera a little bit differently. The lighting changes. They used with that $100 million budget, they use new camera technology, so you get a lot of color pop. Like the reds are super red and deep.
Super red.
And it's called an action noir film, so it's just fun to watch.
In the Japanese fight scene, it's very red before the fighting starts, and in the moment the fighting starts, the lights turn green, as if like it's this street light, like stop and go. So that's really cool. I think I love the scene you're talking about when it's aerial above the house, the dragon's breath shows up, the shotgun shell that lights people on fire or whatever. But it's just such a great, fun image. I'm like, oh, that is so fun.
So we've talked a lot about different things in this movie that are kind of tied into similarities with video games. Something I think I appreciate, and you just rewatched the first one, is that John Wick was on a certain level in the first one, and now it's almost like the bad guys have leveled up to where he is. They're not the same, just... John Wick has a bulletproof suit. Now everybody's bulletproof. They've all leveled up with him throughout the progression. And I do know that they've talked about there is an active development for a game for this movie, because so much of it plays out like a video game, and it kind of lends itself. And we've seen a lot of stories, especially with The Last of Us being popular, of more and more avenues. Books have been such a popular medium to take from stories, and video games are only getting better stories, so it's not out of the realm. I know this director is actually set up to direct Ghost of Tsushima, which is a PlayStation 4 exclusive that was very popular, about a samurai story. So I'm sure that that'll be an excellent visual movie, and likely an excellent story, because it's a very popular game. Do you have any thoughts as far as the video game ties into this, or any thoughts on how video game adaptions could be used going forward?
Huge. This I could spend a lot of time talking here. So one, I totally agree that the John Wick series as a whole, they do such a good job of always upping the ante with their action scenes. And so you got to give them a lot of credit for that. You have to just respect, like, oh my gosh, they made a spectacle of the first one. I was so surprised with the first one. When I went to go see the second one, I was like, they can't beat that. Oh my gosh, they did. And then the third one, they go to even more places, and they're bigger sequences. So in this one, they're so good. It feels like a video game in the sense of, all right, we had this moment where you had to jump through these hoops and do all this. How can we make that more difficult? That's what this game feels. That's what it feels like. So it really much plays like a video game, and I think that there are some interesting themes there. But as it relates to video games and movies, I really do think that there is obviously a growing popularity with The Last of Us being a little popular. You have Uncharted right now that's streaming on Netflix, and you've got some other recent ones that you've obviously got lots of cartoons like Sonic, Detective Pikachu, the Super Mario Brothers that's coming out pretty soon. Those kid movies lend itself very easily to animation because it's just 3D animation. Let's just update it. Let's give a new story, and let's follow that.
And those are all like older, much more simple storyline, streamlined games as opposed to the modern.
But when you see something like Resident Evil, Tomb Raider, The Last of Us, Uncharted, those types of movies, I am interested to see where those goes, because obviously with a video game you have a lot of source material, much like a book or a comic book. There's so much source material to do there, and when you watch the show The Last of Us, it feels like the game. You look for items. There's a lot of homage and Easter eggs to what the gameplay looks like, the show looks like. So that's really cool. Something that I worry about though is there's a huge part of this movie that is based off of The Warriors, a movie that came out in the late 1970s, and it was turned into a video game when you and I were kids. I loved that video game. The movie, I wouldn't say it's a great movie. It's a good movie for 1970s. It, though, has a lot of the same elements that this movie has, like very stylized cinematography, action, levels, and there's a whole sequence in the last major act of the film that is basically ripped in some places almost word for word, but then even like the motif or the vehicle they're getting through, it's just the Warriors all over again. So in my opinion, if you're going to have a really great movie, you can have Easter eggs and nods to the past, but you can't just like copy and paste. And that's what they did. I would rather have seen, I know you sent me an article where the writer was like, oh, I love The Warriors, one of my favorite
Yeah, the
movies.
director and one of the producers was one of the original writers of The Warriors. So one of the producers for John Wick, the series, was one of the original writers of The Warriors, and the director for John Wick was a big fan of The Warriors.
So I get that. You can love the movie and love the story, that's cool. But if you just copy and paste it, that's not good. When they go to the radio disc jockey and she calls the criminals boppers, that's a good enough nod. But then she goes on, they use the exact same songs. They use the same.
They just have French lyrics.
It is way too much of like a rip for me to not dock some points for originality. Not to mention in the original The Warriors, the motif makes sense. They travel from one side of New York to the other, and then they get navigated through a map all the way back to their side of Coney Island in New York. Here, we're seeing them go all across France and all across Paris, where it doesn't exactly make sense. The motif is overdriven and overplayed. I would rather have seen, and maybe this is something we can talk about in another movie or another episode, is I would rather them see just remake The Warriors, update it with the same style that John Wick fighting has, set it in the 1970s, set it today. There's so many characters and music and fight scenes that could be improved upon. And I think if you take away that and put some more originality here, this movie gets shorter, it gets better. I can focus on the action sequences and the characters, as opposed to, like, for me, I kind of got kicked out of it the moment the bopper stuff happened. I was like, what? This is just The Warriors all over again. So, case in point with The Last of Us, it's just the game again.
Yeah,
so
you can put the still shots next to each other.
It is like the script is 1-to-1. We just did it again. So there's very little interpretation to change it. Something I like about John Wick is John Wick feels like I'm playing a video game of just all cutscenes and then all the action. I'm watching like a gameplay video on YouTube. I think that's really cool. I'm getting to experience it for the first time. Whereas if I'm watching The Last of Us and I played the game, I feel a little bit let down of what am I doing differently? Or vice versa, you see, like, I'm a big fan of the Halo games. I just recently went through the entire series 1 through 6. And if you watch the show on Amazon, that's not the game. It's nothing.
No.
They're just. It's like, hey, we just took the characters and the universe, and it's different. So there's got to be a push to find like the right balance between paying homage to the original source material and then not just doing it 1-to-1. Because if you look at other movies that have tried to do this, like Disney's doing a lot of the live action from their like Disney classics of the 90s. If you watch The Lion King or Aladdin, if you watch The Lion King, it is almost a cut rip of the original cartoon animation series. So part of it's like, well, why did you recreate this? You didn't add anything new. Whereas if you watch Beauty and the Beast, there's some new content. It's more mature. There's some new songs. There's new story elements. They interpreted it a little bit differently. Obviously, they paid homage. Like, this is the way that it happens. Here's some opening sequences that we did in live action because that's really cool. But it gives it some like unique spiel. When you look at other movies, if there's nothing new to it, why are we doing it? If you're not upping the ante, which John Wick does, what are you doing? If you're not bringing something new to the table, I don't want to tune in. And I think it's really easy for people to think, oh, new video games, let's tap into that world. Let's do that. But I don't know if that excites people.
And you've seen it be, you've had some success with one season so far, and we'll see if that success continues. But you did bring up like Resident Evil. We've seen a lot. There's been a lot of very popular Resident Evil games, and we have not had an actual good Resident Evil movie or TV show throughout the multiple attempts. And we've seen a lot of really bad video game adaptations where it's like, oh, that was pretty good for a video game movie. But we have yet to really get, aside from the more like kid specific ones, to get one that's like, oh man, this is an awesome.
And I think
adaptation.
part of that is just because like gameplay, like when you watch The Last of Us, there's so much that happens just in the game. So you're watching a lot of the cutscenes woven together, and then they quickly get you there through some action sequences, and they give you some nods how you collect items or fire weapons and things like that. But it's really difficult to have a really captivating game that is playing the game. John Wick is that. It is captivating, and it's cool to watch sequences of this brutes with bigger armor, bigger weapons, bigger guns. In the second movie, John Wick meets the tailor who helps him get his Kevlar suit. And now here we are 2 movies later in John Wick 4. Everybody's got these Kevlar suits. It's the stakes are bigger because not only do some of the goons have Kevlar suits, you have other guys that have bulletproof masks. They're like kabuki masks, like samurai masks. It's really cool.
Kabuki masks?
Kabuki masks. And it's cool. I guess something that I think about is like, what's the future of games being turned into movies or like visual storytelling in TV? I just worry that people will be like, oh, that was a good game, let's make it into a movie, and they just copy it one for one. And
like a lazy story, right?
Yeah.
We've all talked about like there's no new ideas in Hollywood, and what would be simpler for them than just rip the story, almost like The Last of Us did in a lot of ways. And it's kind of a lazy way of doing it just because people, if I can go play that medium the original way, why would I want to rewatch it for hours and hours unless I'm just like a super fanboy or somebody that hasn't played the game previously, and that's not something that I'm into. So I get how that could be kind of a pitfall for them. So hopping back into more John Wick focus, is this a timeless film? Do you think that this will be like more of a modern day equivalent to like a Predator or a Rambo? Or do you think this is something that 15 years from now time won't be so friendly to it? We probably won't talk about it as much. Do you think it's something that hangs around for a while?
So that's a good question. But before I answer that, if you are ranking the films, and this will get to my answer. If you are ranking the movies, the part 1 through 4, how would you rank them from best to least?
So personally, I think the first one is the best of the whole series.
So one,
it's a very streamlined story, and it's very rewatchable because it is just barely over an hour and a half long.
Yep.
Then I would say 4, which is the longest of the movies, but I I think it's visually very good. The stunts, everything's on a whole nother level. I think it's something that I'll rewatch several times going forward. Then for me, it's probably 2, then 3.
See, so that's so funny to me. Literally, we are inverse. My favorite is 3. My second favorite is 2. My third favorite is 1. And then this one is probably my least favorite of the 4. And so the reason I ask you is, do I think this is timeless? No. I think this will be a cult classic. The same way like you said Resident Evil movies all suck. I think there's going to be somebody that comments on this. Like, I love Resident Evil Resurgence. That was the... I delivered my first child with that movie. It was a great movie.
Djokovic is the GOAT.
Somebody's going to be mad about that comment. But they suck.
Yeah. That person, you have bad movie opinions.
You have bad taste.
Don't recommend any movies to us.
You're not invited.
We can talk
to the
about the
minivan.
movies, but don't recommend any movies to us.
But I think it's a good movie. I think that the first 3 are excellent movies. I think this is a decent movie. If you're a fan of the series, I give a lot of credit to the production team. Like the production value of this movie is extremely high. The directing, cinematography, sound, stunts, it's very practical and it's very good. That said, I don't think that the story slaps the way that the first 3 do. I really think that 3, Parabellum, if you were going to put those messages of revenge, action, family, all that into one movie, I think Parabellum absolutely just echoes that completely. It is incredibly well done. I think the first one obviously gives you the premise, but 2 and 3 really explore that underworld, which I think adds some uniqueness to this. Oh, there's this crime syndicate under the whole world and all these interesting characters. 3 just does everything for me. So I think 3 is the most timeless of them all. But if someone was looking back at is John Wick special, I think they would look to number 1 as the titular one because it starts it all. I don't think that this has that same rewatchability and timelessness because it's long. That 2 hour 50 minutes really is tough. I think that, like I said, Danny Yen he's the guy. He's the guy in this movie. Maybe it's just writing. I just love it. I also think that one of the things that struggles with this movie is I wanted to be able to watch like Mad Max Fury Road because it starts and it goes and it doesn't let go because that's what the first one does. That's what the second one does. What the third one does. I know a lot of people have watched this movie and said it's the greatest action movie of all time. Shout out to my buddy Ray Roberts. He watched the movie. He loved it. And I don't know if he loved this movie as the best one, but I've seen a lot of people say, wow, this is the only movie franchise that they get better each time around. This is not to me say that I thought it was a bad movie. I just thought it wasn't as good as the 3 predecessors because I wanted Mad Max Fury Road, but I got this like watered down John Wick meets Blade Runner where there's some really cool moments, some cool cinematography, a lot of passion for creative and colorful shots, but all in all, I think it's a little underwhelming in comparison to its predecessors because they tried to introduce other characters who, like, for example, Mr. Nobody in the film, he is a cool character. There's some cool moments. Probably the biggest moment in the theaters as far as, like, laughter is when he kills that dude and his dog pees on his face.
Oh, that was a great scene.
Everybody in the whole movie, they're like, yeah! Piss on his face.
Yeah, do it again. R. Kelly.
It was awesome. Everyone loved that. But it felt like Mr. Nobody throughout the whole arc of his at the end of the movie. The only reason that he was in the movie is to keep the universe going, as opposed to like having him be in the story to motivate the story forward. When like the only reason I actually got interested in this whole John Wick series is because of the Baba Yaga. I was interested in the boogeyman who beat the system. The boogeyman who is fearless. He has resolve. He has sheer will. There's nothing that stops him. And I saw that for 3 movies. Nothing stops him. And I think it's okay to just keep telling that story. I don't think that this story really did that. I felt like it was a little too convoluted at times.
So I think that Father Time catches everybody and John Wick has been on this revenge tour for 4 films. I think it's finally caught up to him a little bit. I do get the argument that there's less of that like super stealth assassin, because there's so many scenes, we talked about it after the movie, there's so many scenes where John's just kind of like walking around in the open world when he knows there's all these assassins looking for him, there's all these people trying to kill him. He knows Mr. Nobody kind of wants his head at some point, just because their interactions, and he lets him know. I think I like the character a lot. I think that Mr. Nobody adds an interesting dynamic to his relationship with John, where he wants his number to get to a certain price, and so he's helping John along the way, so that way he can get to a marker where he's interested. You see it in the beginning, he's got a notebook and he's writing down numbers, and it's like 5 million, 15 million, 20 million, and he's like got like 50 million circled. Like that's like his price, what he would do it for.
See, and I get that. I get that. Like, Father Time comes for everybody. It's nice to have new blood in the franchise. We've had so many good characters throughout this series, and maybe they didn't know they were going to get this far. It's also one of the nice things about the series. I legitimately think this was just meant to be like a one-off, low-budget movie the first time around. Like, hey, let's just make a movie with Keanu Reeves. No one expected it to be good. And then everyone's like, oh, no, this is awesome. So it's kind of like catching lightning in a bottle. Like, let's just ride this wave till it's in. So I get it. But I am one that thinks somewhere in between 1 and 2, they figured out, let's explore this underworld, this crime and hitman, the kind of lore of the gold coins, the operating. It's both high tech and low tech. It's just really cool, and you got to check it out. That's why I told you to watch The Gentleman. It's very stylized. This movie has its own style, and it's really fun. I feel like we get a lot of that in 2 and 3. That's probably why they're my favorites. You get a lot of that. You get a taste of it in 1. In this one, you see parts of it, but it's almost like the rules change. Like the video game designer decided we need to do these types of things, so we give up on that with like the Marquis, Mr. Nobody. There's a lot of interactions that happen throughout this movie that I think it just seems a little bit convenient, not motivated. And that to me is just lazy writing.
So I think that Donnie Yen's character, Kane, he sets up probably the most interesting of adversaries for John Wick so far from the
well, it's him and William Dafoe from the first movie. They're the same arc of, hey, we're friends, we've known each other for a long time, we're both assassins, and they both kind of help each other throughout the movie, and then eventually William Dafoe gets caught. I think his name is Mason, Mike, something like that. He gets killed by the Russian crime syndicate. Here, you've got a guy that's being hired to kill John Wick, and instead he gets a kind of a more fitting end, which if William Dafoe would have had the story arc that Kane had in the first movie, then he would be this character in this movie, where like they have a moment of adversarial like working together, but they're trying to kill each other. But instead of like killing each other, they just kind of maim or injure. And I think that would have been a great opportunity for him to come back. But obviously he died in the first movie. So
his name's Marcus.
M name. I got it.
R.I.P. Marcus. So I think that over time, John Wick is a character that is going to be culturally relevant for a long time. There will be a lot of moments where people will be able to work him into a conversation as far as like, is it going full John Wick over here or something?
Oh, so that's a better point. He is like James Bond, Jason Bourne, John Wick. He's one of those kind of guys. He is more timeless in his movies.
Yes, so that's my point. Is I think overall the character is going to be more of a timeless asset than each individual movie. I think like a lot of people, there will be people that one's their favorite, and that might be the one they watch. Unlike, it's similar to a Rocky. The only difference is Rocky has the benefit of there's different villains that each person that really likes Rocky movies kind of identify. It's Clover Lane, or it's Drago, or it's Creed, Apollo Creed, and so that's their favorite Rocky, and that's
Tommy.
That's the one they
Tommy,
rewatch.
that punk Tommy.
I think in a lot of aspects it'll be kind of similar to that as far as culturally how it's relevant. The issue that this one has is that these are hard R-rated movies, and so it's not like a sports boxing movie where a younger, like a 12-year-old could watch Rocky and kind of have that relevance. It will be relevant for adults our age. It'll be interesting to see when like people that are in their 10 to 15 range, when they get old enough to start watching these movies, will it still cater? Will it have longevity through that, or will the age gap kind of separate them?
Well, I even wonder, as you think about this movie aging, I wonder what you thought. When I was watching it, obviously it makes sense. He gets the Kevlar suit from the tailor in part 2. So in part 4, I almost forgot that he had the Kevlar suit. So he shoots that first Continental goon in the Japan Continental in the big gray suit. He shoots him, and I'm like, dude, he just shot that guy 6 times. Why is he still coming out? I was like, oh, he's got a bulletproof suit. And then, like, throughout the movie, they keep pulling their jacket above their head as like a way to protect themselves. And I was like, this is really tough to watch because he's shooting like 10 times, and it's just very convenient. It almost feels like at certain times to me, like when I made a movie in 8th grade with an old VHS camera of like, just pretend, like we'll just put some bullet sounds and we'll just pretend like you're ducking it. Oh, like Michael Scarn from,
oh yeah.
Like it's just what it feels like. Threat Level Midnight, Michael Scarn from The Office. That's what it feels like to me at certain times, because it's so advanced and so much in the lore that if you haven't seen the other movies, it can be confusing. Did you ever find yourself in the middle of the movie being a little bit confused, like what you were looking at, because it was either like so real or like so fast, so much coming at you all at once? Did you ever feel like when the flood comes at you in Halo?
No, I didn't really feel that way, just because I think I watched that recap right before, so I was already like mentally invested in the universe, and I had watched a lot of 1, so I was like my mind was ready to see these quick deaths, these quick action scenes, these like all this stuff coming at you, and I was also kind of pre-prepared for like the silliness of like bulletproof suits and blocking bullets with your coat jacket kind of pulled over your head a little bit, which is a really like silly way to look at like these like high level assassins just like pulling their coat over their face almost like a child, and it's like blocks the incoming fire.
Yep.
And so as we are pulling into the driveway, we're ready to park. I know what my review score is. What is your Minivan rating for this film?
So I have to be careful about what I say here, because now that we've put several episodes out into the parking lot for everyone to kind of review here, I have to be careful that I don't just give it a rating that's also similar to another movie that we reviewed. And you're like, well, you gave those both the same grade. How are those the same movies? Because they're not the same. And that's a good caveat to say, everything's a little subjective. And I think in future episodes, we'll talk a little bit how we go into our ratings. But for me, this is a 6.5 out of 10.
Ooh.
I found a lot of the beats to be derivative, and I really think that for multiple reasons that I've already stated, things being a little more complicated and more difficult from what it is, that doesn't mean to say it's a bad movie. I'm not at all unaware of the fact that I rated We Have a Ghost a 6 out of 10, and that was looking at its ceiling, like what the potential is for discussion. I don't think this is a movie you go talk about. This is a movie that you watch and you're like, oh, that was awesome. I loved it. It was fun. But I think the other movies and the opportunities that were built here didn't deliver. For me, I liked the movie. I did enjoy it. Once I listened to a little bit of some of the symbolism, I didn't even pick up on in the moment some of the allegories to like a modern day version of a person traveling through hell, with like the 4 horsemen of death, Dante's Inferno, that kind of stuff. Charon's death very early on in the film symbolizes the opening of the gates of hell, because no one can govern the passing between this underworld into the real world. And I think that's really cool. That's stuff that I didn't pick up on that first watch, but then reading some analysis, I was like, oh, I can see how people liked it. So people are going to disagree with me on this. I know they do, because people have rated this at 10 out of 10, the best action movie ever made. But I just disagree. It's too derivative of other things in a way that's not flattering. It's just copying.
So I personally disagree with you as well, but I do not think that this is a 10 out of 10 movie. I give this movie an 8 out of 10. I think that it does a lot of things right. I think that for the genre, when you're going in, it's a very, very solid action film. I think for a general audience going to see this movie, it's going to deliver a lot of things that you want and expect out of a John Wick film. I think I just watched The Warriors. They do rip off the scene, but I also think a lot of the audience is never going to have seen The Warriors. And for them, this is the first time that they're going to see it this style. So I don't think that that's going to be a negative for the general audience that's going to watch John Wick, unless you're, over the age of 45 or 50. There's a good chance you never watched The Warriors before. I'm in my 30s. I had never seen it before. I knew what it was, but I would.
You uncultured swine.
I know. I would have never caught any of that stuff that bothered Brett, because it was something that he had seen. So that makes a lot of sense. So for me, it doesn't really affect me one way or the other. I give him a little bit. It is kind of lazy story writing, but in a culture where there's so much lazy story writing, to me, it's not the biggest sin of all time as far as movie making goes. I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of people are really going to enjoy it. Rotten Tomatoes isn't the end all be all. There's a lot wrong with the site, but it's got an audience score and a critic score of 94. And so usually when both those scores are close to each other, and they're both high or they're both low, that is generally a good sense of if it's at least a pretty good movie or a pretty bad movie. So I don't think that it's a 90 overall movie. I would not give it that score. I can pick a lot of things that knock the score down for me. But going into a movie where I'm just kind of shut my brain off and watch people die a lot, it gives me what I needed from it.
See, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh with my 6.5, but there are just a few little things that kind of knocked me out of it. Case in point, Bill Skarsgård in this movie, I think he acts his butt off. He's phenomenal as the Marquis. And while I think it's a little lazy and convenient that in 3 we killed the Elder who's supposed to be over all of the high table, and now we kill the Elder again at the beginning of part 4. And now there is a new leader of the high table who apparently is above the Elder in the Marquis. It's just convenient. It feels super lazy. But again, that's kind of like a video game. The next big bad has to approach. So you didn't learn about him in that game, because this is not that game wasn't this guy's story. This game is that guy's story. So we need to explore that. But the way that Bill Skarsgård acts is wonderful. However, his French accent is crap. It's a bad French accent. I know you and I talked about I haven't interacted a lot with French people, so there's how is the normal American gonna respond to this?
You see it a lot with Asian accents. They get actors to do Asian accents. They're just give them the generic Asian accent, and most Americans are gonna be like, "Yep, that sounds authentic to me."
Or a lot of foreign films in the United States are Germans all speak old English British.
Well, yeah, you get you're I'm Jamaican, man.
Yeah, why is that? Why is everybody talk like this in an old movie? I just felt a lot of times he said things like, that is not the way a French person sounds. I've spoken to a lot of people from a lot of different parts of France, and I just thought his accent was terrible. So even though his facial expressions were great, the timing was great. There was so many great moments of him stirring that teacup as Winston is waiting for the Continental to get deconsecrated and it's exploded.
Yeah, for his hourglass to run
It
out.
is awesome. Bill Skarsgård does a fantastic job, and he's really good in this throughout. I just thought his accent sucked. And so little things like that kind of get knocked down. And maybe I'm being aggressive. I should probably adjust my ranking to a 7 out of 10. But I really adjust to that lower. It's probably the most difference that you and I have had on the show.
And it's okay. Sometimes we're going to be wrong on our ratings, and you're wrong.
You're wrong on yours, so that's fine.
It happens. And
I'm the louder person in this room, and you're wrong. Do you think, with the ending of this movie, do you think that we'll see John Wick again? Do you think that we're at the end of the John Wick universe?
Well, spoiler alert, I know we see John Wick again because he's in the ballerina, but he'll be younger. I don't know if they're going to try to digitally age Keanu or any of that stuff. I think as an overall story arc, it's kind of the perfect ending for him. He's not going to have a better death sequence than what they've given him. But as a person that lives in this world, I know that Lionsgate is likely going to make a ton of money off of this movie. And whenever a studio makes a lot of money off of a movie, they want a sequel. And I'm sure that they'll get to a number that they throw at Keanu and the director. Maybe it's 2 years from now, maybe it's 7 years from now. At that point, Keanu will be almost 70, but We'll see how it goes.
Doesn't stop Liam Neeson.
Yeah, I'm sure we could get to a point where they've either both like maybe there's not a lot of checks coming in and they'll agree to the sequel. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see him again, but I think this is probably the best ending we would get for John Wick.
I felt like the ending, like how we got to the ending, was awesome and epic. I was like, well, this just feels like there should be more. Like him getting shot in the hip, or I don't know if he gets shot in the hip.
He's 60 years old. Brady got shot in the hip. Hip breaks are number one cause of senior death.
Did he? Did he get shot in the hip? Did he get shot? Like, is he bleeding out? Because the first 2 shots, he just got like clipped, like grazed.
Yeah,
so
both of them get like.
So it wasn't like a fatal shot. And like we've literally seen in the other 3 movies, he gets like stabbed 37 times in.
He got shot off of a building in
the gut, and he lived. So I obviously have a hard time believing, like, after all the stuff he's been through, this old school revolver is what's gonna get him. This is bull crap.
Well, to me, it's a little bit like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Like, he was so adamant after Logan that was it. That was for real. That was his death. But then you get a new opportunity. You get to be in the Marvel franchise with Ryan Reynolds, and you're going to play in Deadpool. And it's like, oh, well, I can put the suit back on one more time. So I could easily see them being like, oh, Keanu had a good opportunity. He's going to put the John Wick suit. It's a story that he loves.
So back up. Do you think at the end of the movie, when he falls over there on the steps, and then we cut to Helen Wick's headstone, and then beside her is John Wick, loving husband. Do you think John Wick is dead?
I don't think John.
Do you think John? No.
I think
not. Don't give me the Lionsgate answer.
No.
I
think
your
realistically,
answer?
I think he's like in a little fishing village somewhere, sipping on.
So then, how can you say this is the perfect fitting ending for him?
Because it's just like The Dark Knight Rises, where you've got Bruce Wayne in Europe with Catwoman drinking a cup of tea, and he gives the nod to Alfred, and it's perfect. I think you could see the hotel manager. He's on a mini vacation, and he cheerses him across the.
So now you're in the afterlife. The concierge and everybody who died is all together with John. They're in heaven.
Not the Japanese hotel manager.
I know the New York. That's what I'm saying. The New York concierge, they're all like together, and it's like the continental heaven.
I don't think that any of the people in this film are going to heaven.
I don't think, or I refuse to believe that John Wick is dead. I think that this is like all a play. He wanted out. The reason he did all of this was to get out, to get amnesty, forgiveness, or a reprieve and relief of being out. At the end of this movie, he wins his duel. He wins his blood oath battle. So now he has been relieved of his obligations to the high table. We know that in the first movie, we're not told what he actually did, what his impossible task that he did was to get out of it. But we also know that it still came back. The high table and crime found him. The elder at the beginning of this movie says, the only way that you will find peace is in death. And he says, I know. So I think we'll find a little bit of peace, but something else will come up that will bring him out. Like, he had to allow people to believe. That, to me, is the premise of the start of John Wick Part 5. Because I just don't think he's dead. You can't kill the boogeyman.
But if he did all of this to get out,
to be fair,
dip your toe back in,
John Wick is not dead. He did not die. I know that they're trying to set up these other shows with the Continental and the Ballerina, but I think they're going to learn what the MCU has learned is like, stick to your bread and butter. You can go do some side projects, and maybe one of them's cool, but the reason we love this series is because of what John Wick brought to it, not because of what other things are. So the Ballerina, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. The Continental, maybe it's cool, maybe it's not, following a young Winston. But the reason we're here is because of John Wick, and I think that there's a better send-off for him.
There's a lot of people that share a lot of the same sentiment as me as far as they enjoyed the movie. A lot of them enjoyed it a little bit more than I did, but is kind of echoed. And so I really wanted to get kind of a dissenting opinion, and that's why we kind of structured this episode this way, because I knew, especially after our conversation in the minivan after watching, that we had different opinions on this. And if you want a lot of the similar opinions to how I kind of felt about it, there wasn't really anything unique because, like Brett said, it is John Wick. You are just going to see him kill a bunch of people, so there's not necessarily a whole lot to dive into aside of that father-daughter relationship dynamic that I found really interesting. So
yeah, so like if you like John Wick movies, but like you want to see one that's not as good as the others, go watch this one.
Yeah, if you like John Wick movies and you want to see the second best John Wick movie ever,
or the
created,
worst, if you want to see the worst John Wick movie of 4, go watch this movie.
Which is still better than the best Magic Mike movie. So I would highly recommend it over any Magic Mike movie that you might decide to go see.
Well, that's good to know that you've seen all the Magic Mike movies and that you can compare it accurately. But while you're thinking about other streamers, remember, we've dropped a couple of streaming recommendations in today's show. We talked about Puss in Boots, which is on Peacock, The Gentleman on Netflix, Barbarian on HBO Max.
All right, so if you guys have any recommendations, if y'all tell us what you thought about John Wick 4. Do you think that
comment
Nick's right?
in the comments below? Everybody comment what you thought about the movie, and let me know why I'm right and why Nick is wrong.
Yeah, so if all of you could just write Team Nick into the comments and let us know that you're on my side of this argument, it would be great for our discussion.
Okay, here we go. The argument of the century: Team Edward or Team Jacob.
We're 5 episodes in. This is what's going to break us apart. Is our difference
It's
of
over
opinion
after
on
this.
John Wick.
We want to hear what you think about this movie. Let us know in the comments below what you thought of the film.
And if y'all have any movies y'all want us to review, write those in there too. We would love to see kind of what y'all's taste in movies is, and have some conversations about these things. All right, peace.